I told my son-in-law to get out of my house, and I meant it. My name is Bernard Okafor. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the city of Edmonton, and I retired 4 years ago with a pension, a paid-off house in the West End, and what I thought was a good relationship with my only daughter. I thought I had done everything right. Her name is my daughter, and she married her husband 9 years ago. I won't pretend I loved him from the start. He had that particular kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. He sold commercial real estate in Calgary. He drove a truck that cost more than my first home. He once told me, at my daughter's birthday dinner, that renting was for people who lacked ambition. My daughter laughed. I looked at my soup, but she loved him. And for a long time, that was enough for me. My wife passed away 6 years ago. Lung cancer, caught late. We had 11 months from diagnosis to the end, and I spent every one of those months at her side. After she was gone, my daughter was the one who called every Sunday, who showed up at Thanksgiving with a full roasting pan and a bottle of red, who sat with me at the kitchen table for hours just talking about her mother. I held on to those Sundays like they were a lifeline. My son-in-law tolerated them, I think. He was always somewhere else when I arrived, in the garage, on the phone, just stepping out. My daughter would shrug and say he was busy. I let it go. I always let it go. They had been renting a townhouse in the south end of Calgary near the Ring Road. Nice enough place. 2 bedrooms, small yard, reasonable commute for both of them. My daughter worked as a dental hygienist. They weren't rich, but they weren't struggling either. Or so I thought. The call came on a Tuesday in October, about 2.5 years ago. My daughter's voice had that particular brightness to it, the kind that means someone is about to ask you for something. "Dad," she said, "we found a house." I said that was wonderful. I asked about it. "It's in Aspen Woods," she said. 4 bedrooms, double attached, backing onto the ravine. It just went on the market. I knew Aspen Woods. It's one of the nicer neighborhoods in the Southwest. I also knew what houses there went for. "That sounds beautiful," I said. "What are you thinking for a budget?" There was a pause, just half a second, but I felt it. "That's actually why we wanted to talk to you, Dad. In person." They came the following Saturday. My son-in-law sat at my dining room table with a folder, an actual folder, with printed pages inside. He slid it across the table to me like we were in a boardroom. My daughter sat beside him and looked at the wood grain. The house was listed at $840,000. They had pre-qualified for a mortgage, but only if someone co-signed. That someone, according to the folder, was me. They also wanted me to contribute $200,000 toward the down payment so they could keep the monthly payments manageable. $200,000. Cash. And my name on a mortgage for the remainder. I looked at the papers for a long time. I looked at my daughter. She was still studying the table. "Do you want this house?" I asked her. She looked up. "We both do, Dad. Do you?" I said, and I looked at her husband. "Feel that this is a reasonable thing to ask." He leaned back in his chair. "Bernard, you've got the equity. You've got the pension. You're not using $200,000. You're sitting on it. Meanwhile, your daughter deserves a home that reflects where she is in life." Where she is in life. I turned that phrase over in my mind. I thought about her mother, who worked overtime for 15 years so we could pay off our own mortgage early, who clipped grocery coupons and took her lunch to work in a bag and never once suggested that anything was owed to her. "No," I said. My son-in-law blinked. "Sorry? No, I won't co-sign, and I won't be contributing to the down payment." He looked at my daughter. She looked at me. And then she said something I was not prepared for. "Dad, if you don't help us, we're going to have to look at what Mom left." My wife had left a small RRSP account, about $60,000, that had transferred to me upon her death. My daughter knew about it. We had talked about it openly. I had told her it was there, that someday it might go to her, but that I was keeping it as part of my retirement income. I felt something go cold in my chest. "That money is mine," I said. "Your mother left it to me. She would have wanted you to help us," he said. I stood up. I told them to leave. My son-in-law picked up his folder and walked out without a word. My daughter paused at the door and said, very quietly, "You're going to regret this, Dad." I did not sleep that night, or the next. I sat in my kitchen and drank too much coffee, and thought about all the ways I might have failed her, what I had done wrong, whether I had been too cold, too careful, too closed off since her mother died. I went through it all. By the third night, I stopped going through it. I started going through something else instead. I called my lawyer that week. His name is Charles Beauregard, and I've known him since we were both in our 40s. He practices out of a small office on White Avenue, and he is the most careful man I have ever met. I told him what had happened. He listened. When I was done, he said, "Bernard, I want you to do something for me. I want you to go through every financial document you have access to. Bank statements, investment accounts, anything with your name or your wife's name on it, and I want you to bring it all to me." I asked him why. "Because in my experience," he said, "when someone mentions a deceased spouse's assets in that tone, it's rarely the first time they've thought about it." What Charles found over the next 6 weeks was this. 3 years earlier, my daughter had been listed as a joint account holder on one of my wife's old savings accounts. An account I had forgotten existed, holding just under $11,000. The account had been cleaned out 14 months after my wife's death. I had never noticed, because it was not an account I monitored. I didn't even remember the login. I sat in Charles's office and felt the floor shift under me. He was very quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There may also be a question about the investment account she mentioned. I'd like to look at the access history." The investment account, the RRSP, had not been touched, but there had been 2 inquiries into the account status, both originating from the same IP address within the past year. Someone had been looking at it. Someone had been planning. I went home and I sat in my wife's old chair, the blue one by the front window, and I stayed there for a very long time. I looked at the street. A neighbor walked by with a dog. A school bus turned the corner. Everything looked exactly like it always had. I thought about my daughter at 8 years old, insisting on carrying her own backpack even when it was too heavy, because she didn't want help. I thought about the woman who sat with me through 11 months of hospital waiting rooms and never once complained. I thought about those Sunday phone calls, and I thought, I do not know who convinced her this was acceptable, but I know it did not come from her. I gave Charles the go-ahead. He contacted their lawyer. They had retained one, which told me they had been preparing for this moment, and presented the documentation about the savings account. He made clear that we were not going to let the matter pass quietly. 3 days later, I received a letter. They were suing me. The claim was for $380,000. The argument, as I understood it from Charles, was that my wife had verbally promised my daughter a share of the estate, and that by withholding it, I was violating my late wife's wishes. They also claimed I had been financially controlling during my wife's illness, and that my daughter had been effectively cut out of decisions that affected her family. My wife had never said any such thing. My wife had said, clearly and in her will, that her estate went to me entirely, with the expectation that I would use it as I saw fit and pass what remained to our daughter in time. Charles filed a counter-response. He requested bank records, communications records, and documentation of any agreements my wife had allegedly made. He also filed a complaint with the Alberta Securities Commission regarding the access to the investment account. What came back, slowly, over the following months, was not what I expected. My son-in-law had borrowed heavily. Commercial real estate had not been kind to him in the past 2 years. He was carrying significant personal debt. I won't say the number because Charles has asked me not to, and their rental agreement had actually ended because they could not sustain the payments. They had been living with his parents in Airdrie for the better part of 4 months without telling me. My daughter had been told, I believe, that this was temporary, that once they secured funds, my funds, everything would stabilize. The case went before a civil court judge in Calgary in the spring. Charles had retained a forensic accountant. He had the account access records. He had the timeline. He stood up in that courtroom and laid it out simply and without drama, because Charles is not a man who performs. He just shows you the facts until they become impossible to ignore. The judge, a woman in her mid-50s who had the particular stillness of someone who has heard every possible version of a family dispute, listened to the entire presentation. When the other side presented their case, the alleged verbal promises, the claims of financial control, she asked one question. She looked at their lawyer and she said, "Is there any documentation of the verbal agreement you're describing? A letter? An email? A witnessed statement of any kind?" The answer was no. She dismissed the claim. She also referred the matter of the savings account access to the appropriate authorities for review. That process is still ongoing, and Charles has asked me to say nothing further about it, so I won't. I sat in the parking lot afterward for a long time. Charles came out and stood beside my car, and we didn't say anything for a while. It was one of those April days in Edmonton where the snow is trying to decide whether to stay or go. Gray sky, wet pavement, the kind of day that looks exactly like how I felt. "What happens now?" I said. "Now," he said, "you go home. I have not spoken to my daughter since the courthouse steps." She walked past me without looking up. Her husband did not look at me either. I watched them get into his truck and drive away, and I thought, I hope you find your way back to yourself someday. I genuinely do. My house is quieter than it used to be. I won't pretend otherwise. Sunday mornings are harder now. I make coffee for one, and I sit by the window, and sometimes I talk to my wife, which I know sounds strange, but which I have decided I don't care about anymore. She would have known what to say. She always did. I updated my will 2 months after the trial. Charles helped me set up a testamentary trust, a structure that ensures my assets are managed and distributed under specific conditions, not simply handed over. It is not a punitive document. It is a careful one. My wife would have approved of careful. I have a neighbor, a retired school teacher named Irma, who brings me soup in the winter and argues with me about hockey in a way that reminds me I am still capable of laughing. I joined a woodworking group at a community center near my house. I am not very good, but I am getting better. I made a small shelf for the kitchen. It holds the coffee mugs. Every morning I look at it and think, you did that yourself. I am 67 years old. I have a pension, a paid-off house, and a lawyer I trust. I have learned that love does not grant anyone the right to take from you. I have learned that the most dangerous assumptions are the ones made by people who mistake your patience for weakness. I have also learned this. There is a difference between a parent who refuses to give and a parent who refuses to be taken from. I spent too long wondering if I was the first. I am not. I was always the second, and I would make the same choice again, sitting at that dining room table, looking at that folder, with my daughter avoiding my eyes. I would look across the table and I would say no,